One of my favorite parts of hanging out with you
Uh-huh.
is when the security people argue about what software to use. Like when Greg left his Gmail open on my laptop, shit like that.
It happens. It's part of.
It's humanizing. It makes me feel better.
You're like, oh, I'm not by myself. Hey, Finn.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Are you able to hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Finn's the hackathon winner, right?
Yes.
Hello?
I can hear you fine. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I am gonna do a little bit of playing here, so bear with me for a minute.
So should we like put a headset on, or?
I do have headsets. Headset, if you want to do that.
I have one too.
Okay, cool. You can do that.
Can we do two headsets into one?
We could do it.
Or should I connect through my phone and come in that
And you might get the echo issue though.
and I have to sit over there?
I love that.
No. I'll mute this thing.
Okay.
And you could do.
Thanks so much for coming out. Taking the time. Okay, my mom.
All right.
Really appreciate you taking the time last days.
Okay, cool. You have fun, right? You love Seattle.
I have this every day. The real estate cheese. Sounds great. And yeah, toddies. Yeah. No, I'm on my first one.
Hey guys. Okay, please. Hey guys.
Hey.
Hey, are you able to hear me okay?
I can't quite hear you.
You could do it outside too. Actually, Sabrina, can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, is there a lot of echo, right?
There's a bit of echo, yes.
You text me the link.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is the Hey, Alex. Hey guys, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you now.
Okay, and this is no echo. It works fine, right? Yes, Sabrina.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's good. I just turned up my volume. I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. And Bill, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Sweet. So this is like I think the class is just joining us, so this is perfect timing. Hey guys, how's the class doing? Is the class able to hear us okay?
So I think Varun is setting everything up.
Greg, are you on the phone there? Uh, Alejandro, let us know once you guys are set up and your audio is good. Okay, okay, that's fine. So seems like
Wait, is Greg on the call? Because I know Varun and Greg. Yeah.
Yeah, he's on the text, so he's just setting it up.
Ivo, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you guys. You guys can hear us fine?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, and you guys have the video feed as well? Okay. All right, guys, should we get started?
Yeah, we can get started. We're ready to go.
Okay, and before we get started, please remind the class to have the questions on the Google Doc.
Ivo, do you guys have a mic that's closer to your mouth? Or are you doing a open air mic? There's a lot of background noise.
So this would be better, right?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Okay, but we're gonna switch between audio, so it might not be perfect audio. We are two security dudes sitting in a cafe, so bear with all the background noises you have.
I think just pull it up and speak into the phone into the microphone each time. I think it'll be fine.
Okay, awesome. All right. So can you please can you guys please remind the class to have all the questions on the Google Doc? And I am seeing that people are jumping on the Google Doc and asking their questions, so that's amazing. So with further ado, there is a sweet chai in my background here. What I'm going to try and do is facilitate the questions from students and have a conversation with Bill. I would hand over to Bill to introduce himself, tell a little bit about himself, but more so also focus on like why did he get started in cybersecurity, like what's his background like, and what his journey towards his current cybersecurity role is like. So, Bill.
Okay, so can you guys hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect.
Okay, perfect. If we end up getting background noise, then just let me know and feel free to kind of interject and kind of let us know if we're losing a little bit of fidelity. So my name is Bill Reed and I work here at Amazon Web Services. I've been leading a team of security specialists who are solution architects. So we have a role here that is a kind of a customer-facing, interacting role with customers of all shapes and sizes, and lots of different industries. And we as a practice really focus on security and compliance concerns across all of those different industries. And so my task here has been really building out that organization and making sure that we have the right talent and kind of understanding of how to work with customers. Some who are in highly regulated industries and some who are in kind of startup mode and trying to think about security as they go along with trying to actually get a beta product out the door. So we've dealt with all of the, typically all of the commercial accounts. So that means accounts that aren't governmental or in the education sector. So they have a kind of a different different team of people that deal with them. They have some different contracting issues and that sort of thing because of the nature of the businesses that they're in. But it's a commercial business. It's something that we're dealing with. So I'm here based in Seattle. I spent a lot of time traveling around across the U.S. Our market is North America, so it's U.S. and Canada. And I've got a team of professionals who are spread around the country. I kind of got into this job in a pretty roundabout way. If you think about, what's today's path to get into cybersecurity is probably a very different path than the kind of path that I got. I actually started out in the healthcare space. I was actually running clinical practices in healthcare. I actually started out running healthcare, urgent care, and clinical teams, and kind of everything you can imagine related to delivering healthcare to patients. Not as a clinician, but as the person kind of organizing and running those services. And what's kind of interesting is that I kind of decided that I wanted to move into technology, and I was increasingly spending time incorporating technology into the practices. I kind of made the decision that I was going to shift my focus, and I looked for ways in which I could get into the technology space. And really, I ended up coming in through more on the professional services and implementation side of things, because that was a really good transferable skill. Like, there's lots of people who could code, but not a lot of people who could organize and kind of organize efforts. And I think that's been even a theme to today. A lot of what you often see is you've got all the right people who can do the execution. They just don't have any direction or kind of coordination around the efforts. And often a lot of security failures that I see, sidebar, are related to really the failure to properly organize and deliver the services. Not that they can't technically do the service, but they're just not organizing, and they get confused and miss coverage. But I started in that space, and I decided to make that move over. I came in that regard, and then I just spent my time with the technologists that I was working with, saying, teach me everything that you possibly can. And they gave me a lot of work to do. And I spent a lot of time diving into multidimensional databases and large data stores, and writing code and a variety of different things to kind of bolster that experience. I came into Microsoft in 2001. I spent the next 11 years working in Microsoft. And a lot of what I was doing when I was in that space was related to either healthcare or security. So I came in really focused in the healthcare space, but I quickly was working on a lot of HIPAA-related activities. And I spent a lot of time talking to customers about security in the healthcare space, and how to do privacy management in the healthcare space. If you could imagine, at one point, HIPAA didn't exist in that market. It wasn't a thing, and I had to spend a lot of time teaching what that meant to my customers who were providing care or ensuring care. Then Microsoft had this really challenging period where we were being highly attacked, both on the client software and on the server side and on databases. And in a very short period of time, we had Code Red, Nimda, Lambda, or Slammer, and Blaster hit, like in succession, in about probably an 8-month period, that attacked everything from our client operating systems to taking down, taking advantage of exploits that took down the server. We ended up actually holding back the release of Windows Server to kind of re-engineer it from a security perspective. And I moved in to go work on that. For me, that it was kind of like rush toward the fire. That was kind of an interesting spot, and a lot of other of my colleagues kind of did the same sort of thing. And I spent the next several years working on what became security mobilization at Microsoft, and I think was probably a really big turning point in that company. Kind of moving from one culture to a different kind of a culture and really trying to build a good reputation around security and security practices. And spent a lot of time there working on how do we go about improving the security posture of the company as well as our customers. And I did that for a number of years. Then I had an opportunity to go work on a healthcare initiative that we were doing that ultimately became Health Vault, and a bunch of other work in our health solutions group. That's where I met this guy sitting next to me. And we spent a lot of time really thinking about how could we build a trusted platform for health data. And this was really pre-Azure. We were doing it as a hosted service on what ultimately became the backbone of Azure. But it was really how do we get people to build and to trust as consumers a service where we were hosting healthcare data and kind of getting the permission to do that. I kind of ended my tenure there and kind of decided, hey, I'd been here for a long time and I had an opportunity to go join a healthcare medical device company, and I jumped and went there. Ended up building out their security program, being their CISO. Did that again at another company, again, kind of coming in and seeing lots of gaps around how they were handling information security, and kind of built that program back out. And then I ended up at Amazon for the last couple of years. Long story.
So, that really gives a good idea of your journey. But what's interesting of that journey was that you taught yourself technology. And that's one of the skills which students here have to learn, is how to teach yourself a discipline and a skill which you are not going to school for, because 3 years from now, the technology of that era will be very different than what we're doing right now. So, and since you learned how to teach yourself, you've been always learning. So for students, what would you kind of advise as the learning methodology which worked for you, which could work for them? And maybe if you want to take an example of like, how did you teach yourself cloud security, because the cloud's so new? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, kind of one of the interesting things is if we didn't learn about and kind of teach ourselves new things, then everybody would still be Fortran programmers and dealing with COBOL and, Y2K. So, if you think about it, we kind of have to constantly be learning. Even in the time that I've been here at Amazon, we've kind of gone from not being in the security business to being in the security business. So, that period of time, we actually introduced GuardDuty, a product called Macie, a product called Security Hub. We introduced kind of a new engineered inspector service, which does vulnerability assessment and scanning. We have a bunch of other services that really all of a sudden now we're in the security business. We have a lot of things. And in that period of time, there was a whole lot of learning that had to happen on net new products, right? That they didn't exist. The service didn't exist, and now it exists, and you have to know it. And really the way that you do it is you use it. Like one of the things that, and I don't underestimate the value of this, but everybody is granted a set of essentially free accounts in Amazon Web Services. And so in our organization, so we get to go out and play with technology, and we can get whitelisted on early releases of products. So we get to go and use that. But that's really, it's that experiential. It's going out and actually trying to solve a particular use case, or trying to build a demonstration, or trying to design a workshop. And what we find is, in the course of trying to do that, we often find opportunities where there are gaps in the product, and then we turn those into product feedback requests. We get those into the service teams, and they have an opportunity to get those into their backlog and roadmap. So but that's really it. I mean, we have to go use it, and a lot of it is learning from our peers, asking. We have a pretty healthy kind of global security community of practitioners who kind of help each other solve problems. Some people tend to have an expertise in a particular area, like they may be a crypto person, and and so when they're sitting there working on something that's a hard identity problem, there's usually somebody who's an identity expert, and they can go and call on them, or somebody else may be really good at kind of threat hunting and incident response, and somebody else can call on them. And so we do a lot of that kind of. So I think the key is really building a community of people who you can call on to learn from, because I think that both the combination of being hands-on and then having friends who are coaches in that regard is a really kind of good combination.
That's a really good way to summarize it. That the best way to kind of learn something is to do it first, and then have a community of people who you trust to learn from. So that's something very different from what a lot of us usually do, is like, try to go to a course or learn from books. But what really reinforces what you're learning is actually doing it and being advised by people who you trust over a period of time. So when you kind of look at your journey into cloud security from starting in healthcare, which is very a traditional HIPAA security environment, and like now the challenges of cloud are very different. We have several questions from the students who are curious about what is cloud security like? What are the ground challenges? And are those challenges very different from a traditional security before the cloud?
Yeah, I'm a little split on this one, because on the one hand, I think that the general security principles of things like least privilege and really appropriate access control, and thinking about incidents before they happen, and all of that kind of fundamental hygiene of really being careful about credentials, that's really been the same, right? A lot of that is the same. The technology changes, and the way you do that changes. I think probably one of the biggest things that shifts that we deal with is scale. That it's very easy to scale, and what that means is that it's very easy to make a really big, impactful mistake. And so a lot of if you think about it, when you can have huge scale, if you don't put in good control in that, and you don't really think about infrastructure as code, if you just try to manage all of that with kind of SSHing into every box and trying to update everything and manage it that way, you can't do it, right? And if you think about bringing lots of compute to bear on a problem and then tearing it back down, that's really pretty novel, right? In terms of the way that traditional IT's operated. So, a lot of it is really about how can I, take humans out of the processes which I could better control through code, and put the humans on the hard problem of design, of writing the code, of thinking about the problem space, of threat modeling and anticipation, and then automate everything else that I can. So, we spend a lot of time helping people think about how it is that I use CI/CD pipeline for deployment. How do I think about, immutable architectures where I might, take a.
Can you for the students, can you describe the CI/CD pipeline? What does that mean?
Yeah. So if you think about, like, fundamentally, it's the way that we deploy code traditionally. Like, I have a repository where I've got software, a build, I've got a branch sitting in GitHub, and I want to deploy that all the way through. Well, if I think about now my infrastructure as code, right, and part of the way that we think about our infrastructure and treat it is as though it were software, right, because it's already up and running. So it's a service that's there to be accessed by an API. So it's not like you have to build up from scratch a server, bare metal server. The services are there, right? And so it becomes really a matter of how do I communicate a set of configuration instructions about exactly how I want that environment to be, deployed and permissioned. And so that I do as code. So I might build that in a repository, and then I want a pipeline process to build that and deploy that. And if I'm going to use a particular, Linux distribution, I might want to, in that pipeline process, validate that, I've properly patched that instance. Like I've got the most current build of that distribution. If I've got software that's going to sit on top of that OS, I might want to make sure that I've patched it as part of the build process, so that I'm not having to patch after the fact. Like the more I can do in the kind of the build process and the automated deployment process, the more ahead I am, and it tends to be cheaper. So like then I don't have to try to then set up a patching infrastructure on all of the boxes once they're deployed into production, right? Or spend a lot of time if I can deploy everything in an automated process. When I actually deploy the stack of software that is representing my infrastructure, I know that it's patched, I know that it's properly configured, I know that it follows a pattern. And what it allows me to do is then, if, I might never patch software, right? I might just actually redeploy, because if I can automate that deployment, and I can always ensure that I'm deploying the most latest patched set of software, why patch? I mean, it kind of even changes that, where we think, well, one of the critical things of managing vulnerabilities is a patch management process. If on the other hand, it's as easy as pushing a button to automate the deployment of the next build that is all patched, why not just tear an instance down and redeploy? Which is kind of a change. I mean, it's a real shift in the traditional model, where it was very manual and it took a lot of effort to go kind of redeploy software.
That's very interesting. And the modern software has changed. Like we instead of like the biannual deploys of software before, like now we can deploy like every other second. So over the years, what's the craziest security story you faced? Was it in the past, or was it recently? What's the story you would like to share as a crazy one?
Let's see. I had it's kind of a little bit in the past, but it's probably still relevant in many cases today. So at the time, I was working with a large organization who was a customer of mine when I was at Microsoft. At the time, and this may still be the case, but at the time, most of the ATM infrastructure in at least half of the ATMs, the banking ATMs that existed, were essentially Windows boxes. They were Windows clients, and it was essentially a Windows terminal on top of a safe. And so you can imagine that at the time, Windows was under fire and all of that, right? So a lot of times, but at the same time, all of those ATMs that were out there could be domain joined, right? They could be, they could have been managed really in a centralized way, but because of the kind of prior issues that were happening with operating systems, they put layers over all of those ATMs, control layers of software, which basically made them invisible to any kind of centralized management. And so most of the ATMs globally, about 10 to 15 years ago, were managed by rolling trucks. So banks would buy their ATMs from really a consortium of probably about 4 different manufacturers at the time globally. And then they would hire 2 different trucks that would drive around. One was the money truck. So that was the traditional, armored car that you would expect. But then they would drive a second truck around, and that truck was a tech truck. And the tech truck's job was basically to go and service the ATM. So they had access. So the one truck, this was kind of the separation of duties they had to set up. So they had one truck, the money truck, couldn't get access to the terminal, logical access to the terminal. They could physically open the safe and put money in it. The tech guys couldn't get access to the safe, but they had logical access to the software, the terminal software, and they could do maintenance and upgrades. And so every single ATM, if you think about it out there, at one point in time required 2 trucks to go service them. And if you think about how many ATMs that are out there, we had all these trucks rolling around servicing these ATMs all over the world. And today, now an ATM is the checker at the grocery store, that says, do you want cash back? That's an ATM today. But at that time, this limitation on how to manage an ATM really kept the growth of the ATM networks gated, because they had to have this deployment model. And so they couldn't put ATMs in alternative locations because they couldn't manage them. And so once we could work on that problem and try to relieve some of that problem and work out a security approach, we could actually allow them to centrally manage those. And all of a sudden they could start putting ATMs in hotel lobbies and in a variety of other locations, because they didn't have to roll trucks around to randomly check on the ATMs. And so that was probably the craziest, because it was this problem that I never knew existed. It came about because we got in a conversation with this customer, and we ended up, kind of solving a really interesting and big problem.
That's really cool. So, solving interesting problems, what do you think are the top problems in adoption of cloud, and especially as you touch them on security? Do you think all industries are going to adopt cloud, or there will be some industries who won't? And some students also have a question how is cloud security different from cloud storage security, because one probably runs compute, other doesn't. So how do you kind of think of the problems in the cloud space from adoption and security perspective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the adoption is kind of driven not by the technology, but it's by the trust in the technology. And that trust in some highly regulated industries begins with the regulators. So if you're in a highly regulated industry, let's take, for example, the energy sector, you've got to convince, if you want to be an energy producer and you want to operate your control systems in the cloud, you've got to convince the regulator, not just your own people, and not just kind of win over the leadership in your own company, but you've got to convince the regulators that they should change their regulations so that they can allow that particular type of controls and deployment as part of the regulatory frameworks, so that they can actually approve the audits. Because the industries, won't move there if they feel like they're going to have a challenge meeting their regulatory requirements. And so, and often, the regulators are looking at it, and they've got to design a regulatory framework that the majority of the industry can adopt, not just the most progressive one of their energy customers, for example, or healthcare customers or banking customers, right? And so much of the adoption is really moving an entire industry and all of the participants in that sector along, not just a single customer. Yes, you have to move a single customer and help them get comfortable and have the right risk appetite and the right control frameworks and the right skills to put those controls in place. But you've got to convince a really whole energy, kind of a whole segment of an industry that they can do the work, a perennial question that we would get from a lot of customers would be, well, can I see your data center? can I come into your data center and see your data center? And I would get this question often from executives who were like line of business executives or a CISO, an organization. I'd be like, usually the answer is no, you can't. And I would say, but I'd get in a conversation with them where you'd be like, okay, but help me understand what it is that's behind that question. And very often it was, because I'd say very practically, like, what are you going to look for that our auditors are, we hire lots of third-party auditors and regulators to come in and look at our data center. We have all of our audit reports. You can go get them. We pen test our environments and all that. You can go look at all of that material. What is it that you would look for that's different than what our auditors would do, spending weeks in the data center going through a very thorough review? Would you actually even know what to look for? And usually the answer is no. It really is one of just trust. Like, I need to see it. There's the tangibility of it. We probably, as an industry, probably didn't help ourselves calling it the cloud because the cloud is so ephemeral. But a lot of people want to see. They're coming from a model where first it was all on-prem and there was a server. There was usually like a section of the building that all the servers were in on a raised floor. And then it moved to colo facilities, but at least I could like go there and look through a cage, to now an environment where, I can't, and I can't even know the address of the location. And I think that's sometimes hard. And so we have to help people understand different ways of monitoring the environment. There's actually much better monitoring and telemetry today in the cloud than there's ever been in any kind of compute environments. And so you can actually know in much greater detail exactly what's happening. So that's the difference between cloud and storage security. I don't really frankly differentiate. To me, they're all APIs and they're all resources. We tend to approach, one, from a data classification, we tend to think of everything as the most sensitive. So we look to establish a very high bar in terms of data classification. So we want an environment that treats all customer environments as containing sensitive data. We don't know what data it is, so we have to pick the highest category. For those that needed to have a different set of requirements, we created GovCloud, which was an environment built with against a different set of regulatory standards, just so that we could meet some of those user requirements. But for the most part, we look at it and we say, we're gonna build out and run an environment, assuming that it is containing highly sensitive data, and therefore, regardless of whether it's in an S3 bucket or it's in elastic block storage, or whether it's in one of our Snowball devices, or whether it's in DynamoDB, we're going to look at it in the same way. We're going to want to make sure that we have the right controls in place and support encryption services across all of those data stores. And so, that we have a service, the key management service, that allows for data encryption across all of those environments. And so we want to have that. We want to allow people to be able to apply that crypto against everything, regardless of where it happens to be, or the type of storage, or the type of compute that they're trying to do.
Thank you for a pretty detailed explanation of how you kind of see as cloud security and how internally you go about having security uniformly across your assets and your customers' assets. So the students in the class are familiar with AWS. They've all done some programming. They're very curious on using some of the AWS tools. So very specifically, we have couple questions. One is around, does Amazon, especially for students, do you offer any free security products? Or example would be like, does Lightsail have any security, free security offerings? And then a follow-on to that is a lot of students use the virtual coding environment, which Amazon just recently bought. And let me look up the name.
Cloud9.
Cloud9.
That's right.
Cloud9.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, do you have services customers for Cloud9, and then you can expand around the virtual coding environment as well?
Yeah. So, so one part of the reason why we created a free tier is to give people the opportunity to use services and get some experience with those services. What that tends to mean is that you're really using a small footprint, right? And there are some services that might not be part of a free tier, and that so we have done a couple different things. My team's built some kind of workshop material that we've made available. So we do a bunch of different things. We create a lot of workshops, and we have workshops that we deliver at AWS events. And we also do, we have two venues, one in New York City and one in downtown San Francisco, that we call an AWS Loft. And an AWS Loft is essentially a co-working space that anyone with an AWS account can go use. So if you have an account in, free tier account, and you want to go, you can go to the AWS Loft in downtown San Francisco on Market, and you can hang out there. And we have solution architects that are there who can help people, with different problems that they're trying to solve. There's free Wi-Fi, there's pop in the fridge, and you can hang out and work there. We also run a bunch of workshops, including workshops around each of the various technology categories, including security. So we have a security week that we do 4 times a year in San Francisco and 4 times a year in New York City. And it's a 4-day hands-on workshop that we offer to customers for no charge. And you can be a one-person or a big enterprise. You register, you show up, and you get hands-on for 4 days. And we give people, the right resources to be able to get hands-on with those labs and to do that. So that means creating and spinning up temporary accounts to allow people to access the right set of resources, or giving credits for people to put in against their accounts if they use resources. And we've been doing that for a number of years now. We'll continue to do that. We take all of that workshop material that we do, and then we put it out into GitHub, and make that as a resource that people can go use. And with the instructions, like, here's all the steps to execute the lab, here are the preconditions that you need, here's what you should see. We try to do as much of that as possible. The other thing is that I would recommend is that everybody sign up for the AWS Security Blog. The AWS Security Blog is a resource that we do a lot of very hands-on, tangible kind of problem solving, and a lot of step-by-step with a kind of a focus both on the CLI and SDK approaches, but also on the console and how I might solve something. We tend to take both of those types of angles, and that's also a place where when there's a new security feature or security service, there'll usually be a blog post there that talks about it and points to resources. That's also a library that you can go search on, right? So you can go and look through the archives of the blog and see announcements that we've done and pointers to resources. Like, when we rolled out Security Hub, there was a bunch of pointers to resources and labs and materials on that, as well as we just introduced for the first time a security conference, a security focused conference called Reinforce, that is really a security focused spin out from reInvent. We're still going to have security as a track at reInvent, but this one we wanted to have as a specific focus on security, on that we call Reinforce. It's a 2-day conference. We did Boston this last year for 2 days. We're thinking that may grow to maybe be a 3-day And the idea is that it's a very much hands-on, lots of workshops, lots of opportunity for people to do chalk talks and see and kind of get down into the weeds on a variety of our services. And so we take all of the talks from that and we make those available. So those are all out on YouTube, and there's no paywall in front of them. You can just go and get them, and there's probably, I think there's probably 80 hours worth of talks that are out there right now on a variety of different things. So if you want to go into the deep internals of KMS and how we manage our key hierarchies, you can go get a video on that. If you want to understand what we're doing with respect to privacy law, there's a video out there on that. And so that's another resource to learn from. And then, outside, I really like A Cloud Guru as a great resource. They do a nice weekend review of AWS and a lot of resources there. But there's a lot of those types of resources as well. I think that that are reasonably lower cost. But we have lots of free stuff, and I would really encourage people to kind of exhaust that.
Thank you for sharing that detail list. So I would encourage students to check out the AWS security blog. I personally also like Cloud Guru, which is a pretty good summary of cloud security concepts. And for those who are not familiar, KMS is a key management service, and this is a very very cloud artifact of how keys get managed securely across different servers. So I'm happy to dive deeper in that if you guys want to know more about KMS. So switching gears a little bit, Bill. So the students are kind of like, from a career perspective, planning their career. So what they're very curious on is, like, as an employer, as a team manager, what do you look in your prospective employees? And then secondly, for entry-level people or interns, how does MSP go about hiring them?
Yeah, so there's, so I'll kind of come at it, some of the things that I look for. My team is very customer facing, so I look for people who are really very want to be in front of customers. Right? You kind of have to want to engage with customers and kind of be out of the comfort zone of kind of a private office, because a lot of times the work you're doing is sitting in one of your customers' conference rooms or in their cube farm. And so that's a kind of one aspect that I just want to I'm looking for people who have had experience in front of customers. It doesn't have to be in front of customers doing solution architecture, but they've been in front of customers, and that could be any kind of customer service job. I mean, frankly, anybody that's dealt with customers and can kind of handle hot emotions, can handle reticence, can kind of all that stuff of handling people and interacting with people. The second is building. Like, can you build stuff? Do you like to build stuff? Do you like to get hands-on? What is the first inclination to go try it? So if somebody's they've built something, they've built a portfolio, they've got some really interesting problems that they've solved. I'm curious about that. That tells me about how they approach problems, because we're gonna have to solve problems that nobody solved before. I mean, we're kind of on the front end of this kind of type of computing. And so there's going to be a lot of scenarios and use cases that are going to come along that are an application of the technology that we haven't hit. And the best way to do that is you got to go try it. And you got to have a good kind of test discipline on well, how would I do that? I see a lot of people who are really, they kind of come at security from a red teaming perspective. They want to hack. That's great. I think that builds a lot of technical prowess and deep understanding about how systems are designed and can be pulled apart. But also recognize that a lot of the customers that we're dealing with, that's a really foreign idea. They get scared by red teaming. They, you know, and so we also want to help them kind of plan and put perspective around things. So, you know, I look for people who can communicate well, kind of reframe a problem and kind of talk about it. Ways of getting, you know, what we look for, you know, we do a lot of university recruiting. We do a lot of, we have people that come in from a variety of different experiences. I work with people who have all kinds of levels of education. I've got, you know, I work with people with 2 PhDs all the way down to people who have a high school diploma. I would say that, you know, you probably, you know, if you can build the kind of the technical and education base early in your career, it'll save you a lot of time and heartache, because it's really hard to go back later on, right? It's really hard to go back as a mid to later career professional and try to pick up the PhD or to pick up the master's or pick up the bachelor's. You know, it tends to be, as hard as it feels now, it tends to be a lot easier when you have without some of the later complications, and then the economic consequences of leaving a job to go pick up a degree. So I would say that, you know, but go to things, go talk to, you know, like I've talked to, you know, a lot of like job fairs at universities and kind of career day stuff. And it's remarkable, like how some people just won't come and talk to me. Like maybe you know, I'm not a friendly person. But you know, I'll be there and I'll see like people that they do the cruise by, and they pick up brochures. But you know, like go talk to people. Like especially if what you're trying to do is get a job talking to customers, go talk to the people that are there and get them talking. And don't leave without getting contact information. Like, know how can I get in touch with you? Who should I talk to? How can I learn more? Just don't let them off the hook. You know, so.
That's really good advice. You know, rather than passively just picking up a flyer, you should really go and talk to the recruiter or the person supporting the booth at your career fair. So that's really great advice. Switching gears a tiny bit, but still in the same aspect of it. So what do you look for culturally in people you hire, and what do you think students could do early on in their career to be a good cultural fit for most of the corporations hiring technology employees today?
I would say, you know, we tend to like to talk about ourselves as being a bit of a peculiar culture. So you'll hear that around Amazon, that we're peculiar. There's a couple things that about, I'll give you about Amazon. So we're a very writing centric organization. So things happen here because somebody writes a document. We do kind of odd things, like we start a meeting with everybody reading a document, not just jumping into a PowerPoint and talking. You classically, you walk by a room and you'll see a bunch of people all pouring through a document with red pens, reading it. It's kind of, you know, we approach it as from the perspective of, look, you know, let's work off of you know, an organized, thoughtful piece of researched document that's describing how we're going to do something, and then everybody kind of reads off the same base and we debate those ideas. And it's not about like, did you have a really slick PowerPoint and fancy transitions? It's really how well thought through is the idea. So that's one kind of thing. So don't underestimate writing. You know, we tend to think today, you know, it's, can I create a TikTok? Um, you got to also be thinking about, like, can I actually write and convey ideas? That still matters. The other is, you know, we have a set, we operate here on these things called leadership principles, and there's 14 of them. And they're used in hiring and decision making, and really one of the main benefits of them is that it allows for distributed decision making. You know, it's kind of a rule set for how to think about a problem, and we actually do think about them. So, you know, the number one principle is customer obsession. And so you'll have people look at an idea or a product idea or even an implementation of a service, and we'll say, well, is that really helping the customer? Like, and then we have other things called invent and simplify, and we'll say, well, is there an easier way that we could do that? Could we simplify that interaction? Like, do you really need to do that many calls to accomplish that function? Like, could we do it in another way? And you'll hear people push on those types of things that directly come off of that. So if you're ever gonna, you know, and I'd hope that you all will, but if you're gonna look at jobs at Amazon Web Services, really go look at those leadership principles and think about them. There's a bunch of material out there on it. We put them out on our Amazon job site because they really are a basis for how we interview and what we look for from a cultural perspective. But again, you know, writing matters, and you know, the ability to really solve problems from a customer perspective.
No, that's really true. Being able to articulate your thought and being able to write a concise document is a critical skill which you could be doing right now. And as you probably heard from Bill, like, there is employers who really value that skill set, and being able to present your ideas in more than 2 lines is important. So kind of like a little more digging into hiring and culture, and especially Bill, you're coming from a non-technical background where you learned all the technical skills needed for your job. How do you kind of balance all those things? Because balance is critical in today's you know, information-hungry world, competitive world. So when students are learning, it's very easy to get, you know, too preoccupied with it, or it's very easy to kind of focus on a couple things. But it's important for a rounded person to be balanced. So in all of these activities the students are going through, as well as an employee you have to go through, what do you recommend are key things for one to achieve a balance?
So it's hard. You know, I'd love to say there's some easy formula, but I do think it's pretty hard. You know, I think I read a massive amount of stuff, like from not just, you know, internal docs, but external. You know, whether it's news coming from SANS or coming from blogs, or, you know, just Krebs' latest. Like, I'm reading a lot, but you know, you don't always have time to get through it all, and so you know, I have pangs of guilt that I didn't finish reading something. And I've got a giant pile of stuff that I sometimes print out because I think, well, if I can see it, it's going to make me more motivated. Sometimes it works, but I do read a lot, and I share a lot out to other people, and people share stuff back to me. That's that part of building that network. And then, you know, the other is just go look at other domains. I mean, if you think about it, like, you know, if all you do is operate in a single domain, like all you read is security stuff, and all you read is, you know, is things that are the same echo chamber of security. You know, the tendency is that, you know, your circle gets smaller and smaller in terms of the way you're thinking and being influenced by ideas. And so I'd say, you know, I tend to, for example, I tend to look at security just because of my background. I tend to look at it from an epidemiological and biological basis. And I think of a lot of what I see and observe in the way I think about security in the cloud works because I tend to look at things from as like a public health problem, like all the basics of trying to understand how things spread, where there are vulnerable populations, you know, whether they're vulnerable servers or services or APIs. It's kind of the same thing. What's basic hygiene? How do you get everybody to do the basics? How do you make it so that people don't have to think about the basics? They just happen. And so I look at like I'm reading this book. They are multitudes, right? It's all about the kind of the biome that exists inside our bodies associated with, you know, bacterium, right? That's my, like, I'm reading that and I'm looking at it going, wow, that's kind of like, wait, isn't that a lot like containers? Like, you know, that's like all these little organisms that exist inside a, you know, well, that's like when I go and get containers and out of, you know, public repos and container registries, isn't that like consuming, like, yeah. So you can kind of think about like how to borrow from other areas and read other things and go exercise and walk a lot, listen to podcasts and rock out.
Certainly, like, you know, that's critical. Reading is critical, and also like just rocking out is critical too. So you mentioned a little bit on the balance in terms of like how you manage your network. So you read a lot, you share that a lot. Like, can you give the students a bit more specific advice on how to go about building their network and how to kind of do a sincere as well as a meticulous job of managing the network? Because everyone kind of gives that advice, go talk to people, go build your network, but like, you know, it's sometimes hard for students to start because they don't have specific things they could do along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you're in a large organization and you're in a certain role, you have an unfair advantage, right? Because like if I'm in the role that I'm in a large company like this, like I have positional authority to go talk to lots of people, right? So that, you know, that's an unfair advantage of the role, right? I think really the key is to it's remarkable, like what I find remarkable now, and I wish I had known about this earlier in my career, is like if you just ask people to have a conversation with you, especially if they're in your company, they probably will. Like, but we don't tend to ask. Like, we don't say, hey, can I come and talk to you and find out what you do in your job? Because I'm just curious about what you guys do. And I'm wondering how it impacts what I do. You know, I just find that like, I probably didn't do enough of that early on. And you know, now I just like, I reach out to people, even, you know, with much bigger titles than I, and just say, hey, can I come and talk to you? I find generally people will say, yeah, you know, it may be a scheduling issue. I might have to push it out a ways because they're busy people, but, you know, yeah, I think they'll talk to me, and, you know, and then I'm going to do my homework to make sure that I'm making good use of their time. But, you know, even just, you know, asking somebody, hey, can I come talk to you for 15 minutes and say hi and introduce myself and learn a little bit about what you do? It's awkward. It feels kind of awkward at first. Like it's like any new skill, right? You know, if you picked up a tennis racket and you didn't play tennis, it'd feel really awkward, right? The first time that you hit a tennis ball. It's the same thing. Like you don't expect that it's immediately a skill that you have. You got to build the skill and practice it like any other skill. And so, but you got to try it. And so that's typically, it's going and just doing that over and over, and then keeping that going, and then offering things of value. There's people who, what makes really people who are really good at networking, and I've seen master people at networking, is that they bring things back. They offer things back, like, hey, have you seen, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while, but I'm sending this to you because I remembered that you were interested in, sea turtles. And, next thing I know, I got an article about sea turtles, right? And, it's stuff like that keeps, that network going. And then when it comes time to, now I need help solving a problem, I've got those relationships to build on. But, early in your career, you all are sitting in a network right now, in a class, and there's a network there that of people who may be part of how you're going to solve problems in the future. And I've crossed paths with people that I've met early on in my career that I am still, I come back and work with them over and over. There's one colleague I've worked with her in 4 different companies in the course of my career. There's some other people who I've worked with twice in my career in different places. There's people who, so you never know, but you just gotta, it's a skill that you just gotta try. It's going back to like learning a new technology, right? It's awkward at first, and then you gotta go do it.
Oh, that's very true. Talking to people and kind of be genuine about it, sharing information and curating the network where you are right now is more important. So whether it's a big company or a classroom, if you will, that's very true. So we're coming towards the end of session here. All the students are also going to go take their exam after this lecture. Most of the students actually. So I'm hoping they did their homework and looking forward to seeing them next time without the burden of having to write an exam. But before we kind of wrap up, like, there is like a lot of questions, but also like the fun questions around like, where do you see all this going? And also like, do you actually think like, Amazon might upload Jeff Bezos' brain into AWS, and that will be like where everything ends, and we all will have the most efficient system? Where do you think all the clouds going? Where the security is headed, and in general, what do you kind of see us as a civilization headed towards? And there have been like several questions around the future, so I'm kind of combining all of those together.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had some unique knowledge about the future, but here's a couple things here's my opinion here. I think that we're on the beginning of well, we're kind of in the middle of a long journey, particularly related to privacy. So I think that paying attention to where privacy is going is something that that you should think about. There's quite a bit of work in terms of how do I design and do privacy engineering. So it's a little bit different than security engineering because it's really about how do I think about the data custodianship and the way that the relationship and responsibility I have to the people who provided the data, namely all of us. If you think about it, Facebook just got a pretty hefty fine that was fundamentally about privacy and its lack of privacy engineering. And if you think about like the issues that Equifax is dealing with, it's fundamentally a privacy problem that they had that spawned from a lack of controls. But it exposed in that settlement and a lot of the review of that, it exposed that they really lacked a privacy-minded culture. They didn't really take seriously the responsibility that they had around the custodianship of that data. And so that's an area that I would say is only going to increase. And the fact that we have the California Consumer Privacy Act coming into force next January, the fact that we've lived with GDPR now for a year and big fines are starting to come out, the fact that there's a privacy law in Brazil and India and Mexico, it's not going away. So really thinking carefully about how I can think about security in the context of my data and privacy responsibilities is important. I think that identity and identity management is an area that is tied closely to that, which is it's a really hard problem to solve. Is how do I know who you are and what you're entitled to be able to do? And the more we abstract away from individuals, and the fact that individuals have lots of different personas that we take on in different parts of our lives and responsibilities. And then when we delegate actions to robots to do things for us, identity gets really confusing. And it's a big challenge, I think, in a lot of compliance issues with respect to CCPA, for example, which is how do I know that you are the person who is making a request to learn about all of the disclosures of your information? I have to be able to positively identify you, because if I turn over that data to somebody else, I breach. So identity is another big area, and you're seeing a lot around how do I get away from passwords? How do I have a different kind of zero trust models, and how do I really manage identities? Expect a lot more in that space, I think. Well, I don't think we've solved that problem yet, and I think it's complex.
No, indeed, the future is complex. Identity, privacy, and how the cloud kind of brings all of that together in a very unseen way is problematic. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate taking time to talk to the students. Can we thank Bill with a round of applause, guys?
We had some issues getting the video feed in class. So what we're going to do is we'll take a picture of it and we'll all say hi.
Please do.
Okay, cool.
Are you going to send us the picture?
Yeah, I'll take. Are you guys ready? All right. All right, buddy. Give like a piece of that. Are you signing off from here?
I am signing off, but I was just hoping you send us the picture. But I'll hang up now, and I'll share the picture with Bill as soon as you guys send it to us.
Yeah, it's sent by text message.
Thank you, guys. We'll go get some beers. Bye.
Thanks so much. Okay.